the child called the mother, the child might say to the mother, "Mother, I'm hungry." The mom bring the food, and then the incomplete circle, that was the hunger, is completed, and that moved now to the background, and a new need moved to the foreground. So the foreground is literally that which the child is the most conscious of now in the moment. In this case now it was hunger. So I'm hungry, I've made contact with the environment, which is my mother. In this case, I get food, my circle is complete, it moves to the background, and now let's say a new incomplete circle moves to the foreground, and this new circle is maybe now I'm lonely and I want to play with a friend. Lonely. Oh, myself. Okay, lonely. So now maybe I have to ask my mother again if I can have a friend. So I connect with her and I ask, "Mom, can I have a friend that can come this afternoon and play with me?" Maybe my mother says she will arrange something, and she arranged and a friend come, and that need is complete. Now, in the same way that I've just explained that the child that make contact with the environment to satisfy needs, and that process of organismic or self-regulation or regulation of the organism goes on and never stops, because each time a new need comes to the foreground and a complete need goes to the background. In that specific same way, when we have a child in therapy, we make use of specific projective and play techniques so that the unfinished business in the child's unconscious can also move to the foreground, which will be the conscious or the ego, where we will complete that. So organismic self-regulation is an important aspect to understand in terms of how a child function. It's important to understand, to ask a question in terms of, in therapy, in terms of why does this child need to have this behavior? In other words, what need of the child is satisfied through this behavior? But then it's also important to understand that in the same way that needs are satisfied through this process of organismic self-regulation and foreground background movement, where when one need is completed, it moves to the background and a new need comes to the fore. In the same way, in therapy, we also help the child to become aware of unfinished emotions, of incomplete circles in the unconscious. Right, now we are moving to the next part here. We've already discussed holism and we've already discussed organismic self-regulation. And I have already explained that when we look at self-regulation, we look at external regulation and we look at internal regulation. So external regulation, I'm going to read here, normally interferes with the spontaneous process of internal regulation and causes the spontaneous process of gestalt formation to be lost. And that can then lead to fragmentation, and that the individual is no longer functioning as a holistic unit. So external aspects can interfere with needs regulation. For example, if the child make contact with the environment and then the environment is not available for satisfaction of that specific needs, or the child's need is denied, or maybe the child's even abused for having that need. Internal regulation is spontaneous and natural and unique to the individual, whereas external regulation is enforced upon a person from the outside. And here is an example. Children who need love and attention make use of internal regulation when they spontaneously run to the mother and hug her, whereas external regulation, such as where a child are afraid that their friend will laugh at them because of cultural prescriptions, can deter them from naturally and spontaneously satisfying the need. The need is therefore not satisfied, and this often leads to fragmentation and an incomplete gestalt in the child. What is an incomplete gestalt? A gestalt is what I use now in terms of, to explain in terms of the circle. So incomplete means that the need stays not satisfied. In other words, the circle is not completed and it becomes an incomplete need, unsatisfied need in a child's life. And what we say about children always is that a child will get their needs met no matter what. and a child will grow up no matter what. So if I cannot satisfy my need in a healthy way through the process of organismic self-regulation that I've just explained, I will have to find non-healthy ways, the unhealthy ways to satisfy that need, and we will talk about that again. Okay, so I've already explained the whole concept of figure ground. Is now the next concept in this chapter. So figure ground is where the child literally organizes the senses, the thoughts, condition, and behavior around a specific need until it is satisfied, like I've explained with I'm hungry or I'm lonely. Once the need is satisfied, the child moves to a state of withdrawal, rest, or balance until a new need appears and the whole cycle repeats. Now, if a child experiences more than one need simultaneously, the healthy organism will pay attention to the most dominant need. For example, if I'm hungry as well as I want a friend, maybe if the hunger is more important or more dominant, the child will first ask for food and then to have a friend to play with. So a healthy functioning person or a child who grew up with a message that in this house it's safe to have needs, and then later as the child grows older also let me help you to develop the skills to satisfy the need, will be a child that will be able to identify the most dominant need on the foreground and then to use the resources available to satisfy that need. Then the moment when the need is satisfied, we talk about homeostasis. In other words, a state of equilibrium in the psyche of the child, till then a new need come to the foreground. Something about younger children that I've written here, they will only be able to gain awareness of their needs in a limited way according to their level of development in order to find the resources within and without to satisfy the needs, because a young child frequently don't understand what they need. We all know the example of maybe a 2-year-old child is waking up in the morning and having a sore throat, but cannot say that to the mother, and what we see is a child that's very clingy, a child that's now crying to go to school suddenly, and no one realizes the child's actually sick and not feeling well. And that is why young children still need the support of the parents to help them satisfy their needs. And then also, for example, a teenager will experience different needs now, like a need for freedom and independence, whereas maybe a younger child might more have the need to be able, when they play with a friend, to check in with the mother to see if the mother is still there. Children sometimes might also have to suppress their need on the foreground in favor of another need. For example, something that will be more socially acceptable. And preschoolers find that very difficult because they are very egocentric. So it's very hard for a preschool child to postpone need satisfaction. Now, we know, and that is why we see so many temper tantrums in pick and pay 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because the child waited the whole day for the mother to come home and now wants something, like a sweet or something in the shop. And if that is not available, then the child cannot postpone that need satisfaction, and the only way that they know to regulate that energy of that emotion that built up is by falling down on the floor and shout and scream, and the parent feel very ashamed. Now, so then what we also say here is that egocentric, so your preschool children, takes everything that happens with them very personally, and they want their needs satisfied immediately. Primary school children is more able to start to understand. They have more what we call cognitive empathy, so they can start to understand, well, maybe my mother was at work the whole day and she's really tired when she comes home, and I can just give her 10 minutes before she can help me with my homework. Whereas a preschooler normally would not take the parents' own emotions into account in that way. They have more what we call affective empathy. And what affective empathy means is literally, I feel what the other feel. That is why when one baby in the creche starts crying, everyone starts crying. Okay, now let's talk a little bit now about the process of gestalt formation and destruction as part of the organismic self-regulation. Now, so the first stage is called awareness, and that means that you have to become aware of the most dominant need in your foreground. Now, on your foreground, So that can be, for example, hunger or social need or pain. Needs can be physical, it can be psychological, it can be spiritual, it can be social. So we get different kinds of needs. Then the second stage after becoming aware of the need is the mobilization. So the awareness of a need is followed by the mobilization in terms of how am I going to get this need met. The healthy person is ready for action. So a child that is capable of healthy self-regulation will know, even if in a very immature way, how to make contact with the environment to satisfy this need. For example, then asking a friend to come and play. This third stage is where the individual becomes fully involved in the action he or she has chosen to satisfy the need, and other aspects move to the background. For example, the only thing that I'm now aware of is that I'm very, very hungry, and maybe that I'm lonely or want to sit on my mom's lap. That needs is now on the background. Now, for a few moments, gestalt completion takes place in the here and now. For example, the child hugs a friend and the need for a friend is satisfied. Then stage 4 is called post-contact. Once the need is satisfied, the contact is completed, the child experiences equilibrium or homeostasis, and the child, for instance, no longer feel that he or she is alone because I had a friend, and that need that is satisfied now move to the background. Stage 5 is then called withdrawal. During this stage, the person withdraws to a state of rest or equilibrium. And there is then this in-between between gestalt completion and a new need that will come to the foreground. So we all know how good and satisfied we can feel if you were hungry and you had a nice meal. There will be a moment where you're just at peace and you're just in equilibrium. Now, it, however, is normally a short stage and maybe even shorter with young children, because a new need can very quickly move to the foreground, and now the whole process starts all over again. I'm aware of the need, I mobilize myself, I make a choice how I will satisfy that, I make contact with the environment here, the need is satisfied, the post-contact, and the withdrawal take place. The other thing that we can say here is that certain needs, like emotional needs, can be very abstract to children. In other words, it's hard for them to explain what they really need. And sometimes we do not understand why a child has specific behavior. For example, a child might show aggressive behavior, whereas the child actually wants attention or the child needs love. So in terms of emotional intelligence work and skills development, we have to reflect children's feelings back to them, so that in a sense the child can learn an emotional vocabulary and learn as they grow older to satisfy their needs and to start saying what they really need. So if a child's emotions are never mirrored, a child will not be able to say what they need, because they will never learn the feeling language that they have. Okay, so I've already explained the whole thing about the child and the holism and emotional self-regulations. So young babies, as they are born, are 100% dependent on adults to get their needs satisfied. And for example, by crying, they give a hint to the parent, and often we don't know what it is, but they do show from the very start that they have a specific need. Now, if their needs are met most of the time, we know that is a stage of trust versus mistrust. If you look at Erickson's phases, the child will learn that the world is a safe place. Now, and the child will also then start knowing, as they grow a little bit older, in an immature way, to start to talk and to try to verbalize what they need. So the way in which the adult acts towards the child when the children express their needs are very, very important. If children's need for acceptance is satisfied by the recognition they get when they eat all their food, they will probably eat all their food when they experience this need in future. If children, for example, repeatedly get the message that the expression of anger is not permissible, they will possibly start suppressing that. And now we know that the word emotion comes from or means energy in motion. So if you have to suppress an emotion, it means that it will go somewhere else. If we look now back here at the board, if I have to suppress an emotion, it will most probably come out in a bodily symptom or sometimes even in a sensory symptom. So that is not a healthy thing. Then children also react towards trauma in their life by blaming themselves, and preschoolers also take responsibility for the trauma in their life. And if a child has been abused or traumatized, they also often have the fear that a needs will not be satisfied in future. Now, because the child grew up from very young that my home is not a safe place, maybe sometimes there's food, sometimes there's no food, sometimes there's love available, and sometimes love is mixed up with abuse. Some children grow up in a very unpredictable environment where it is unpredictable in the predictable, so the child never knows when the mother or father will have a next rage attack or temper tantrum or whatever. So this will often then be children that do not know how in a healthy way to make contact with the environment to satisfy needs, because when they were young and they tried that was met with either ignorance or abuse. Right, so what I'm going to talk now a little bit is about the whole thing of making contact. So we can, when we talk about contact, where does contact take place? Contact takes place on the boundary between the self and the environment. So this is literally called the contact boundary. So contact boundary is the boundary between the self and others. And contact means literally you make contact with the environment to satisfy needs. Now, so that is what contact making is. The child, the environmental field around the child consists out of boundaries now, and we get intrapersonal boundaries. In other words, the boundary between the different subsystems of the holism of the self, the boundary between the senses and the body and the intellect, etc. And then also interpersonal boundaries is the boundary between the child and the environment, that boundary. Now, so the contact boundary is the point where the I of the child meet what is not I, and I've already explained the environment can be anything that is not the child. Now, so anything, it's not just a person. Boundaries must, however, be penetrable in order to ensure exchange between the child and the field environment. If the boundary is rigid, we get a dysfunctional system, and I will talk about that when I talk about contact boundary disturbances. So through contact making and appropriate withdrawal, children's needs are met and they grow, and that's a healthy way. If the boundary is rigid and not flexible, this is referred to as isolation. In other words, what we can literally draw here, if I can just take another color, is that sometimes the boundary between the child and the environment is extremely rigid. Now, rigid contact boundary. And what that literally means is that the child cannot make contact with the environment. I think a practical example will be, often in dysfunctional families, there's a subtle rule that what happens in this family is a secret, and you don't talk about this with other people. And specifically, it's not said to the children, but they just know that no one needs to know that mom or dad is an alcoholic or whatever. A rigid boundary would also be where children are not at all allowed to socialize with other children. I think a most extreme example would be where maybe a child is sexually abused and the child is having specific symptomatic behavior at school as a result of that. And the school maybe call the parents in to discuss the child's behavioral problems, and the parents decide to take the child out of school and put the child at homeschool. The reason actually that no one must find out about the abuse. So the mother also approves the abuse from the dad. And then a next way in which the isolation is escalated is that this boy is also not allowed to play outside. So the parents literally have to make sure that this child has no contact with anyone else, because if he has contact, then the secret can come out. And that is what we call isolation. Now, I think literally we can say that if you're totally isolated from any other systems, that you will die now, because you need the environment for food and caretaking, etc. So it's a very, very unhealthy thing to have a rigid boundary, and that is a very typical sign of dysfunctional families. So, healthy functioning employer, the child must be capable to distinguish with what belongs to themselves and what belongs to others, and must be able to withdraw, to make contact, satisfy a need, and then withdraw from that gestalt on the foreground once it is completed and move to a next need. The other a way in which need satisfaction can take place, or that we also have not a healthy boundary, is not a rigid boundary, but let's almost say a broken boundary. In other words, the boundary between the child and the environment is diffuse. It's also called in gestalt therapy confluence, which literally means that there is not a boundary between me and the environment. And that would be, for example, where family members of different ages might walk maybe naked in front of each other. Maybe a parent can go into the room of a teenager without knocking on the door. So in other words, I have no place that I can call my own. Now, parents will, for example, if a child is school going and the little brother of 2 or 3 years old want to come into the room, the parents will just say, let your brother or sister in your room. So you don't have a choice or safe space that you can call your own and have a boundary. Everything in the house is everybody's, and in a sense it also implies chaos now, because boundaries bring structure. It brings also structure in terms of what belongs to me and what doesn't belong to me, and it brings safety. Now, that's why children also have limitations in terms of behavior that's allowed or not. So, confluence or boundaries with holes in, or the boundary that I've drawn there, that's actually a boundary of holes, so anyone can come into you, will also mean that in an emotional sense that the child will make everything that happens in their life take that personal. So they don't at all have the capacity, if someone says something bad to them, to say to themselves, this has nothing to do with me, this is a projection, and I give the projection back to you. The other way in which you can see a lack of boundaries is, for example, if a therapist asks a mother in front of the child, why is the child in therapy, or what did mommy say, mommy or daddy said, why do you have to come into therapy? And the child say, when the child starts to talk, the mother talk on behalf of the child and answer the questions that is asked of the child. Another example of no boundary or boundary of holes is where the child doesn't have the capacity to make any choices in the playroom. Would you like to play with the brown or the grey clay? And the child will just keep on saying, I don't know. Would you like to make a sand scene, or would you like to play in the dollhouse? And the child will just keep on saying, I don't know, or the child will expect you to choose, or the child will, the mother or the father will choose on behalf of the child. And what we frequently see is that the parent, specifically if a parent maybe have a fast-paced, strong-willed temperament, will choose on behalf of the child that doesn't choose, and then the child never developed this boundary around himself. That brings us to the end of part 1 of this discussion, and we will now go on to part 2.